I'd like to welcome to the JPP, the Jewish Philanthropy Podcast, Michael Bloch. Michael was a senior partner at the world-renowned firm McKinsey & Co. for 23 years, where he worked with senior executives, and boards of large corporations in more than 10 countries to accelerate their growth, leverage technology for competitive advantage, and transform their support functions. In parallel, Michael has worked for over a decade with non-for-profit organizations, helping them define their strategy and implement growth initiatives. Over the years, Michael worked on the employment of weaker populations, a new museum, immigration for highly skilled olim, food rescue, women's entrepreneurship, integration of Haredim into high-tech, scale of educational programs, etc. You can imagine that he's been highly impactful and has touched many different realms. And prior to McKinsey, he was a researcher at Berkeley, also at NYU. He worked at a company, a Swiss company, earlier on in his career. He holds various prestigious, illustrious degrees. And today he spends a lot of his time on an institution which he'll tell us about called Israel Impact Partners, where he consults for various foundations and help them in terms of planning their philanthropy. Without further ado, I'd like to welcome Michael to the podcast. Great to have you here.
Thanks, David. I'm excited after so many conversations to finally be on the other side of the screen. Thank you.
Excellent. So I happen to know that Michael listens to the podcast, so it's always great to have listeners as guests. It's always fun to wear the other shoe. I always ask my guests to begin, just please, even though I just read your bio, but I'd love to hear you articulate in your own words who you are and what you feel you represent.
Sure. So I grew up in Switzerland, in a traditional Jewish family in the French part of Switzerland. I went to the local school, studied business technology. As you said, I worked a bit in the banking technology world. I spent 2 years in the US. These were quite foundational years, one in Berkeley, one in New York. I went back to school to do postgraduate research. But I met my wife, who's French, and decided to come back to Europe. So we got married, and I joined McKinsey indeed, so global consulting firm. I was one of the leaders of the tech practice. When I joined, we were 25 in that practice. When I left, we were 5,000. So I was one of the partners who over time grew the practice from there to there. We spent 7 years in Switzerland. We moved to Paris then to lead the practice in France for 5 years. And it was 2010, I was a young senior partner, and I didn't see myself stay in Paris forever. It felt boring. And I had this dream.
By the way, I've never heard anybody say Paris is a boring city.
it was not boring, but let's say, I could see myself spend another 20 years there, and that felt boring. At the same time, we had dreams of making Aliyah, and we felt that was the right time. The kids were the right age. The professional situation was the right one. So we made Aliyah in 2010, about 14 years ago. We live in Ra'anana. We've got 3 kids now, from 21 to 12. And I spent a lot of time with McKinsey traveling over the world. I was every week somewhere in Europe. Every month I was in the US. Did many things for McKinsey, served large clients on lots of things. But I also discovered early on that you could help nonprofits with the same tools that you use to help large businesses. And I started to help nonprofits every year to work on their strategy, to work on their growth. And that felt, at the end of the year, these felt the most impactful projects and the ones that gave me the best feelings.
How did you get exposed to nonprofits? I mean, like people volunteer for their shul. Like, what was the first not-for-profit that you kind of began to dabble in while you were working at McKinsey?
I guess people hear about you, call you up, ask if you can help. I think the first one was someone I knew from the venture capital world, who was also the chair of the board of a nonprofit that helped olim, new immigrants with lots of skills integrate into the Israeli world, and we helped them clarify their strategy and a growth model. And you know how it is, it was successful, so someone else called, and then someone else called. And I would take, a few projects every year on the side. But in 2020, I decided to leave McKinsey because I was tired and I wanted to do different things, and I wanted to stay in that philanthropic world. So I did what McKinsey guys do. I spoke with lots of people who knew something, 150 people. It was COVID times. People had time. They were stuck behind in their homes. Zoom was new. They were excited to get someone on Zoom to speak with. So I learned a lot about the needs of the Jewish philanthropic world in Israel. And I realized that there was a large opportunity to help foundations. Foundations are sort of the professional teams from very wealthy and very generous individuals who have organized their giving through a professional team. And these teams need help. They need help with three things in my case. One is to grow up the nonprofits that they help. They want to give more money, but these nonprofits are not always equipped with all the strategies and plans and processes to take this money and put it to good use. So we help with that. Second is they need to convert ideas about specific social goals they have for Israel into plans. To give you an example, we worked on how do you increase the amount of computer science students in the country? Or how do you increase the amount of gap year students that come from the US to spend a year in Israel? It's not enough to have money. You also have to have a strategy to work on the right issues, to have a plan for doing so. That's the second thing we do. And the third thing we do is we help new funders, either people from the high-tech sector who made a lot of money and want to start giving, or people who come from the US and want to start giving at scale in Israel. We help them build their plans, which basically means understanding their goals, their interests in giving and matching it with the needs of the country, and then finding who are the right vehicles for their giving. And I do that with a team of people, mostly ex-consultants who I've worked with over the years and who I constantly sort of evolve. And it's been a fun ride. It's been a very impactful and fun ride, I should say.
Sounds fascinating, particularly like from where I sit, from my viewpoint. Really interesting. It's interesting. The first point of the three that you made, actually, a little bit, I think you probably say this is accurate. It kind of parallels a little bit in the for-profit space, a VC fund who like guides and helps its startup founders in terms of helping them have the tools and support and skills to scale their startup venture. Similarly, you mentioned this idea, like a lot of very affluent people have foundation teams, right, who are working on the goals and the initiatives of their founder, of their funder, in essence.
Right.
You're holding the hand on some level or guiding those teams, those individuals to best implement their vision and their goals.
And not just the foundation teams, but also the nonprofits that they support. Nonprofits are typically staffed by people with amazing hearts, normally amazing visions as well. They don't always have as much business capabilities, and their teams don't always have the capabilities to take things from good to great. And that's where we come in with strategies and visions and plans and processes, a lot of research, best practices we bring from other places, either from the business world or other things we've seen from a network of experts that we bring to help them. And this, combined with the money of the funders, normally makes great things happen. And the satisfaction, I don't do it for the money. I'm not aiming to create a business empire here, but I'm trying to leverage my skills and experience and the money of the funders to create the most impact I can for Israel. I work nearly entirely focused on Israel, part of my own personal will not to travel as much as I did before.
Got it. Fascinating. So this is I think it's on everybody's minds, right? In the sense that certainly in Israel, and even we in the diaspora are very much, we're in this post October 7 reality, right? We're very much, every day, every moment, whether it's in shul with our tefillot, whether it's looking at the news 100 times a day, where everybody's anxious and everybody is thinking about Israel, and hearts and minds and prayers are with Israel. But part of whenever the fighting ends, and we hope it's sooner rather than later with a very strong victory for Am Yisrael and the Jewish nation and Jewish people. Certainly, there's gonna be at some point like I guess there's two frameworks, right? There's the immediate post October 7th needs in Israel. People are displaced. The army needs support. Everybody needs support, right? And then there's, of course, the longer road of rebuilding. And so I'd love to hear some of the. I'm sure you're involved in both aspects of that. I'd love to hear a little bit about that.
Well, I think everybody has gone through a number of phases in post-October 7. And I think we're entering into phase 4. Phase 1 was basically everybody was shocked and sad and angered and nearly paralyzed. But very quickly, people started to mobilize to help, and everybody in his own way, some people in cooking, some people in serving on the front, some people in raising funds and buying equipment. And we all did some of that, like
By the way,
second phase,
if I can interject just for a moment, I know you don't want to focus on yourself, which I respect, but I just it would be interesting just to hear like your experiences on that day, kind of how you
yeah.
found the whole bit.
Oh, so no, so our experience was quite unique in the sense that I went to Darwin really early, I think at 6:30. We had a one alert in Renana. We didn't really take it seriously, but decided to still make our way to the protected room. I thought it was a mistake. Went home maybe 8:30, 9 o'clock. Was home until I went down for Mincha at 1:30, and that's when I learned what had happened. But there was not a lot of information available then, at least in our neighborhood. So we went to a few friends, talked a bit about what they had heard, but it was still a little bit unclear. And it's only at night that we heard the full news. We were slightly protected on that day from the news. But on the next day, we started mobilizing, and like I like everybody else that was not serving on the front was trying to help the soldiers, buying equipment for them and so on. But after a week, I realized that was not the way to do it. And we moved into phase two. Phase two was how do we sort of build bigger things and scale. In my case, I got involved with a group of friends from different organizations to build an air bridge to bring equipment at scale from the US to Israel to serve the needs of civil defense and civil rescue. I raised a few $1 million through some of my clients and put them to use through that team. And also I started advising a number of donors who were looking to help. And I'll say a bit more about what the themes are, I think, which are critical. They were there in October. They're still with us today. And there was a third phase, which started a few months ago when we started to work on actual projects to rebuild Israel the day after. And I think we're getting into that implementation phase now. So what are the themes? The themes, they were there in October. I think they're still there today. I think there are 5 key themes that at least I see. One is how do we support the displaced communities, the internal refugees, about 120,000 internal refugees that had to leave everything, go into hotels. How do we provide for education for the kids and things to do for the parents and so on? The second is mental health and trauma. How do we help the various circles of people impacted, whether the families who were on the Gaza border, the families of soldiers, or all those who lost lives on this day or shortly after? How do we help the refugees who are going through very difficult times? And now, how do we help soldiers who come back and have seen terrible things for 3 or 4 months? And there's a real challenge of scaling up the mental health system to deliver for them. So that's the second. The third priority is how do we rebuild the South? We have and soon the North, where we have communities that were destroyed, and there are questions of infrastructure, but also frankly questions about how can we use the crisis to rebuild better? Can you have a better agriculture now that you can use technology differently? If you have to rebuild anyway, why don't you rebuild the agriculture of tomorrow and not the one of yesterday? The fourth priority is one of economic growth. There are many small businesses, for instance, that were highly impacted by the fact that their leadership went to the front, or their clients disappeared, or they couldn't go back to the factories. How do we support economic resilience for the country? And there's a fifth story that people talk a bit less about, but which I think is equally important, which is the achdut, the unity that we see in the people of Israel, or that we have seen in the last 4 months. How do we build off that and strengthen that unity rather than see it disappear before the next election? And there are various groups at work, and I did quite some work with them, quite a lot of organizations that are trying to prepare for the day after, to help the different tribes in the people understand that they should work together. They should see themselves as brothers and cousins rather than as enemies, and find the common themes, the common policies that can connect these people together to rebuild the country rather than take them apart. And these will be things that will be with us for a number of months now. It's not going to disappear.
Yeah, I mean, there's a dictum, there's a concept of Tzarchei Abeinu Berubim, like the needs of our nation are great. That's in normal times, but certainly in extraordinary times, you're certainly highlighting so many different frameworks. One of the first things you mentioned is interesting to me because I think it really touches on something that I think affects a lot of people, whether you're a major donor or you're an individual small donor, let's say like myself or others. that everybody wants to, certainly immediately, right? Everybody wants to
Right.
give. And you always have this, whatever the crisis may be. It could be Jews in Ukraine. It could like, what's a trustworthy mechanism for giving? Kind
Yeah.
of what's for real? What's
Yeah.
overhead? What's like? So it must have been very beneficial, to have somebody like yourself on the ground who kind of has a very clear, I assume, a very clear viewpoint of kind of what's most worthy to give to, right?
I'll tell you what I told donors and what I still donors today when they call, and I'm specifically referring now to sort of crisis times. We can talk a bit later about how you do this more strategically as you shape your sort of tzedakah strategy for the future, whether you're a small guy or a big guy. I think in the current moment, one should remember, first of all, the needs are immense. The country needs a lot. And so whatever you do, it's going to be helpful at some level. But the ways to make your money even more helpful is, first of all, to work with professionals, not people who were sort of born yesterday, but organizations of professionals with real expertise, with history. I like organizations that use a lot of volunteers because it gives more leverage to your money. You provide money to hire trained volunteers, but you don't need to pay them. And so typically your money goes further with them. I think you need to be careful not to pour more money where a lot of money has been poured already. I don't want to give names, but there are organizations that raised 50, 70, 80 million dollars that actually don't know what to do with it, that are keeping the money for the next 5 years. And that's great for them. But because there are some urgent needs next to it, one should not go where everybody else has gone and be a little smarter. I also think that it pays to be very focused, i.e. to pick one field and to really learn about it, build relationships with people who know something, with the nonprofits that act in that space, so that you can become a little bit of a wise investor. Because by spreading your money too thin over so many things, you never learn, and you never really get to know the organizations or know where your money has gone. Myself, I've always been giving very systematically my maaser, 10 to 20% of my earnings. I have made a practice, even before I started to work in the field, to go visit nonprofits every year. I would take 2 or 3 from my portfolio of nonprofits. I would go visit them, learn about them, get a feeling of how good they are. And over time, some of them I would drop off my list. Some of them I would promote to a higher rank and give more money. And then the last thing I would say is it's very important not to forget the current recipients, or the historical recipients of your tzedakah, because they're at risk. People who work on poverty. It's not seen as a hot topic post October 7, but the poor are just as poor, if not poorer, and the people who work on poverty need help.
Right,
The
right.
same for Torah learning. People who are supporting yeshivot and midrashot and the like. Well, they need your money just as much as before, and the same is true in healthcare and other topics. So I always tell people to add to their giving, not to switch, because the old organizations are just as in need and just as worthwhile today than they were yesterday.
It's very powerful. I work in the not-for-profit space, in the fundraising space, and a lot of us, like, kind of right after October 7th, nobody felt comfortable asking anybody for anything that was not directly, immediately servicing the needs on the ground in Israel. And then, we all realize that we have organizations that still need to run, and still all the meaningful programs and impactful programs, exactly like you're saying. And that kind of galvanized us and kind of gave us the azut kedusha, gave us the kind of like the brazenness to ask. And right, they ask really now as people to stretch, right, in times of crisis, to do more, as opposed to cut back or to reallocate, which of course is helpful, but right, it's that's a very, very valuable, important point. Okay, very good. So let me ask you this. So let's say I'm running a foundation and I have a foundation team, and we talked to Big Adol. Let's talk more specifically. Like, so a lot of these foundations have 6, 7 employees are part of their foundation team. Each have different roles. There's a program officer. There's somebody overseeing all the different things, etc. What is the real value add? Consultant's a vague term, but like what specifically? Why if I'm running a foundation, and you're hired for a very distinct period of time? Like, how does it work, and like why exactly would I bring you on?
Right. So what I see is most of these foundations, at least the one that want to work with me, and there might be a reason for that, we'll understand that in a second, are organizations that were founded and funded by owners who made their money in private equity, in venture capital, in business, and they want to invest their money the same way they've earned the money, in a very professional way. They want metrics, they want tracking. But when they realize that, who they're facing in front of them, the nonprofits they work with don't always have the same rigor and are not always able to answer all their questions. And so the foundation team do their best to sort of scan the world, find the nonprofits they want to work with, and they want to give real money to scale them up significantly. And that's why I come in. I come in as sort of an extended arm of the foundation to support the nonprofit in developing, in transforming, I would say, a vision and sort of an amorphous idea into a real plan. And what we do is we take the money of the foundation, the vision of the organization, and we help them develop the strategy to take their vision to 2x, 3x, 4x as many people over a year. So we develop a strategy, we build plans, milestones, trackable metrics that you can come back to 6 months or 12 months later and see where you stand. And we help the organizations, the nonprofits, build the capabilities they need to deliver on these ambitious goals that the foundations have for them. And what's nice now, I've been in it for 3 years, so I've been doing 1-year check, 2-year check with organizations I served, 2-3 years ago. And it is impressive to see the development of these organizations, using our plans and all the great people and visions that they had in the money of the funders to do great things. I'll give you one example. I worked, more than 2 years ago for an organization that helps Haredim men that are learning in Kollel and have now 2, 3, 4, 5 children and need better parnassa and want to go out in the world of business, get a job in order to support their families. And the better jobs are in the world of high tech. So there's a number of organizations that help these people transition from the world of Kollel to the world of high tech. So one of my clients picked one of these organizations, said, I like them best. I'm going to give them a few $1 million over 3 years to scale massively their impact. And we came and did all the work that I mentioned to make it happen. You come back 2 years later and you see how instead of serving 200 people, they're serving 500 people and going on to serve 800 people and scaling the good things that they do. So that's in a nutshell what I do and why foundations come back. The real test of a consultant is not if you can do a good project, is if the client comes back and back and back. And luckily, I have 4 or 5 or 6 clients now that come back on a regular basis, and that gives me confidence that I'm on the right path.
It's really fascinating in the sense that I'm going to just point out what I think the leverage proposition is on some level in terms of how, I know a lot of not-for-profits. They're very happy with the way they run. They may conceptually want to scale, but they're not necessarily interested in having some outsider kind of come in and tell them how they should do it. And the response to that is fine and good, but we're not giving you our money. Meaning like the leverage that let's say the leverage that you have over the not-for-profit to kind of help them scale is the fact that if you want our support, if you want our, it's just interesting because I imagine a lot like if you would come to not-for-profits without the backing of the foundation or the donor and say, I have a lot of great advice for how you could scale and be more effective, they may say thank you, but no thank you, right?
Exactly. So the key in what I do, and I think that's the only real chidush in the whole thing, is that the client is the foundation, but you've got to make the nonprofit feel like they're the clients, i.e. the foundation pays the bill, but the real client day to day is the nonprofit. And you've got this healthy tension, exactly as you said, which is if you want to get more money, Mrs. Nonprofit, you've got to play ball, and it is a challenge. I have to tell you, it is a challenge because these social entrepreneurs, they're brilliant, ambitious, good-hearted people. They're not always the best, operations officers and CEOs and so on. And so you've got to find the right balance. Sometimes it's about adding people to that team. Sometimes it's about training them to do certain things a little bit differently. And when it works, when it clicks, it's really wonderful. Sometimes it is more challenging. it is more challenging. Yeah.
How does the original shidduch come about? Meaning the original partnership. The foundation already has this pre-existing relationship with
Very often, very often they do, and they say, I'd like you to work on, with this nonprofit. Go see them, see if it clicks, if it works. It often does, not always. Sometimes, I decide that I don't think it's going to work out. Sometimes they decide that they don't like it. In 80% of the cases, the shidduch works, as you said, oiled by the money from the foundation. I get them to talk to former clients. That's always the best thing. When 3 other CEOs of nonprofits tell them it really helped them, that typically unlocks things. And off we go. But that's part of the work. The other part of the work is to take a social goal the foundations have. I mentioned the computer science students, I forgot if I mentioned them. 2 or 3 topics we worked on were growing the amount of computer science students in the country, growing the amount of gap year students in the country. Recently, we worked on how do we strengthen the center in Israel at the time of, as I said before, where you need to build on the achdut that you find in the country. How do you strengthen the center at the expense of the extremists on both sides that are trying to tear the country apart? So you take these relatively unstructured problem. It's a nice goal to have, but how do you do it? What's the plan? What do you need to do to get there, and who do you have to fund? You have to build leaders.
Who, what, how? Yeah, I'd love to hear that. How do you?
Exactly. So take the maybe the less controversial example of how do you increase computer science students in the country. Well, we discovered that the issue was different university by university. First of all, we discovered that the deans of universities were not interested in growing the amount of students. They were interested in doing great research and raising a lot of funds for their teams. But when we got past that initial disappointment, we realized that the issues were very different. In some universities, the issue was, how do I attract more professors? Because my salaries are not competitive today. But if I could give more money to the professors, I could attract then 10, 20 more professors and open a lot more class. I have the space. I have the students that want to come. In other universities, they had the professors, they had the buildings, but the professors were spending all that time on sort of admin issues. So the money was helpful there to hire more teaching assistants and change the balance of responsibilities between professors and teaching assistants. So we worked with a number of universities to understand what were the constraints and unlock those constraints with the money from the funders. Mm-hmm. Or to give another example, we worked on the religious Zionist sector. That's a sector that, again, has a large center and a bit of extreme. And there was a foundation interested to strengthen the center, what's called here the moderate religious Zionists. And so we build a strategy around building new leaders, working with communities around shaping the next generation through education, shaping the next generation of moderate religious Zionists, on increasing their voice in the media. And so once the strategy is emerging, then you ask the question of who are the organizations you can work with, who are the leaders you can individually fund to get there, and how will you measure progress and know that you've arrived somewhere.
Are you ever involved in, let's say, funding or starting up a brand new organization, something from scratch, yesh me'ayin, something that doesn't exist yet? Like, is that, or it's really with organizations that already are on the ground?
I think Israel is blessed with thousands of nonprofits, about 15,000, but I think 7,000 of which have what's called here Safe 46, the sort of the equivalent of 501c3 in the US. So they are sort of established organizations. So with thousands of organizations for only 10 million people, we don't lack nonprofits. And the last thing Israel needs is another nonprofit to do what the others do already. We actually need more mergers, bigger nonprofits, more professional ones, more scale, more performance comparison across them, and not new nonprofits. So I'm kind of resisting from building new things, but we're rather trying to find who's the best owner for the new thing we want to do, and how can we work with them to make it happen. That's the better strategy, I think.
Got it. Do you ever find that some of your client, like, you ever fire a client? I'll ask you, like, in the professional realm, like at McKinsey, I'm sure you work with a lot of, you must have had difficult clients at times, wasn't a fit, or like even now you may be working with a foundation that's not a good fit. How about that piece? Like, how do you
manage? So I tell you, no, this doesn't really happen, but it does happen that we need to have tough conversations with the CEO to say, look, you are a visionary. You're a person that knows how to establish long-term plans, how to convince donors, how to recruit people, how to, work on content, but you actually don't know how to lead a large organization. You could lead a team of 10, but you don't know how to lead a team of 30 or 40. You're actually, overactive. You always have new ideas because you're visionary, you're energetic, and you confuse your team with all these new ideas. And you need a different person, a COO-like profile, a chief operations officer that will step in, turn your visions into strategies and plans, oversee the implementation, put in place metrics, start measuring progress, be better at budgeting, be better at performance management. And so you need to split your role in two, a CEO or a COO. In more extreme cases, sometimes you need to ask the CEO to step aside and get a new CEO in. That's quite rare, could happen. Some of them are actually relieved because they actually much prefer being sort of big guy and not have to manage day to day. So you work with the people. The goal is to work with the people, not to do things onto them. And in the end, you've got to buy the advice. So you've got to find something that works for them as well as for the funder.
Interesting. It's a hard question to ask you to answer, but what is the biggest priority right now? And I mean, in Israel, what if you had a rank? You mentioned a whole bunch of different things that you're engaged in and involved in. I don't know if you would speak to what you think maybe like is most pressing right now. And I'll ask particularly in terms of the war effort, like what would you say is the most pressing? As somebody on the outside, I never really understood kind of the dynamic of, we all have like relatives in units and units were asking for gear. It's like there's a gap. Like why don't the soldiers have what they need from the government? And but that's a separate question. But I'm just curious.
So first of all, I would say part of the difficulty in the topic of tzedakah, charitable giving in general, is that it's very hard to compare performance across topics. Who knows if it's better to help a poor person have what to eat, a sick person get treatment. It's better to help education of younger kids so that in the future, they're not poor, they develop the country. And so many other worthwhile goals, whether they're cultural, Torah related, and so on. And even if you look at the halachot of giving, if we take a more religious perspective, once you've covered the basic needs of a poor person for housing, lodging, and food, you've got a lot of flexibility as to how you can allocate your money. There are some guidelines, the people who are closer to you before the others, the people who are close to your city before the others. There are some priorities regarding Torah learning versus other topics, but Halacha gives you a lot of flexibility because somehow God created all of us in different place with different preferences because He needs all of us to be interested in different things so that the world as a sort of composite mosaic works out. So the question of what is the one priority is probably impossible to answer, and probably rightly so. What I can say is, in the short, immediate term now, is where we stand. We need to win this war. We need to, clean up Gaza of all the terror base so that we can live in a safe place going forward. We need to use that pressure to bring back the captives so that they don't have to spend years in dark dungeons. And then we've got to rebuild the country, which means keeping this country united and strong, and then working on infrastructure, on education, on the economy. That's a little bit, I think, the roadmap. Now, you asked about the needs of the units and so on. I think there were, the country was not really ready to mobilize 350,000 reservists and get them all the latest equipment. The country's strategy was, we'll give them what they need for when they need, for what they need to do. But Jewish mothers and fathers being what they want the best for their kids. And so every kid's, called his parents and his uncles and wanted the best equipment. And so that created that sort of mass of WhatsApps and emails and so on that we all got. I think it's fair to say that at this stage, everybody has what they need. And they are much more pressing need than to get another helmet or another, all the units have what they need, that they're very well equipped. There was a lot of money available. We're beyond that.
What's your take on the barbecue phenomenon, like all these barbecues and there's a.
Again, I think it's wonderful, and I think it's I have a neighbor who does that. I think it's amazing. It's wonderful. you ask me if this is more important. I don't know how to
No,
answer
no, I'm
that.
not asking you to answer that. I'm just,
What I know is there are people whose heart tells them to go do barbecues, and there are people whose heart tell them to do mental health, and there are people whose heart tells them to support Torah. And that's the way it should be. And I'm trying to work with the people with their hearts and not tell them what to do. I'm trying to, when they ask, we can answer. But it's much more about understanding what your heart tells you to do and then helping you do it the more effectively. Because the one thing I would say is that there are too many nonprofits in each sector. And once you start taking one sector, we talk about Torah learning for, not Torah learning, we talk about moving Haredi men into high tech. Or you take the topic of feeding the poor, or the taking of helping survivors of the Shoah. When you take a topic at that level, you realize you do have 10 or 15 nonprofits of scale, and the world does not need 10 or 15 nonprofits of that scale at that level of a small micro sector. So there you can go and start measuring the effectiveness of each organization one next to the other, and start funding the more effective ones, and help the least effective to either merge or improve performance. There, I'm quite big on the fact that the nonprofit world in Israel lacks what is so basic in the corporate world, which we call benchmarking, the ability to compare performance amongst companies. One of my medium-term dreams is to introduce benchmarking to the nonprofit sector in Israel and help donors understand where their money can go the furthest once they have decided in which area they want to give. But that's
how do you measure? We talk about this a lot in our space, even in terms of, let's say, like we service special needs
yes.
families and children, etc. So do you measure the impact on the participant? Do you measure the impact on the, on the surrounding family, which of course benefits as well? Like there's so many ways to measure impact. So that's
right. So I can say that typically in every nonprofit, the question comes up, and it typically takes a few weeks to sort of define. What we typically do is we define a model, a language of impact, and a model for the different circles of impact that you create. Take this example, the impact on the child, which might be how developmentally he's accelerating his development over a year, 2 years, whatever. The impact of the family, which might be happiness in the family, how much free time they have because you take stuff off them. Might be the impact in the community and how the community is getting more sensitive to individuals that need. And then you have to understand, how do you measure that? Okay, so on the child, maybe there are standardized tests you can give and you can measure between the benchmarking group and the group that you're working with. On the parents, maybe you do surveys. On the community, maybe you measure, I don't know, media articles about at-risk kids or kids with special needs. So you define these metrics and then you go and measure that. So these are efforts that, as you understand, take a few years to really bear fruit because these are complicated issues. But once you've got that, then you can start taking 5 or 10 nonprofits in the space and ask, how are they doing against those metrics? And foundations are typically there not just to feed short-term needs, but to also put in place an infrastructure that will help the field get better over time. And there are foundations who are very interested to fund that sort of performance measurement efforts, so that over time, one knows who are the top 3 nonprofits, because then for the same amount of money going to the nonprofits, if they can ensure the money goes to the most effective nonprofits, they've increased the performance of the field with no incremental giving. But I would say, at least in Israel, this whole area is quite immature and needs a lot of work to develop.
Not just in Israel. Not just in Israel. I was saying it's an area ripe for development. There's no question.
Right.
Definitely.
Right.
No question. I'm curious to hear. I mean, I read just recently, just for example, that Friends of the IDF, it's a well-known organization, is making a very substantial very substantial gift to one of the hospitals for mental health. I think I read that somewhere. Talk a little bit just about the mental health needs. Explain to me a little bit better, like kind of where is the, I mean, why isn't it yet developed fully for the needs? The society is one where there always is a lot of trauma. Is it just quantitative? Like we're just
Okay, so it's a very powerful question. So yeah, I think the Friends of the IDF are building a new mental health unit in one of the large hospitals. I think it might be Shaare Zedek, if I recall correctly. But the needs are immense, and the needs are immense because take an organization. take an organization like One Family. We used to treat families of victims of trauma, typically car bombings and pigwim, roadside killings and the like. They might be dealing with 20 or 30 families historically a year, and they had a stock of a few hundred families to deal with. Come the 7th of October, they suddenly have hundreds more families to deal with, if not thousands of families to deal with this year. And so an organization that was built to deal with X suddenly has to deal with 20X. And the organization is typically not ready, and it takes a bit of time and money and know-how to be able to scale up to the level that is required. And so the same happened at the level of the mental health system in Israel. There is only so many psychologists and psychiatrists and social workers and so on available. Training them takes time. So there's a finite capacity of people that you can work with. We tried importing some from the US and other countries to work with people, but it will take time to develop the right response. In addition, a bit like we discussed, it's a bit unclear what is the best way to help. Take a soldier that comes back to Gaza after 3 or 4 months. What's the best way to diagnose if the person will suffer from PTSD? And find the right treatment for him. What is the right treatment for every stage of pre-PTSD? And so there are people who are now investing heavily in researching these issues and finding the best solution so that we can target the right treatment to the right.
Well, they don't have like evidence from other wars or other places in the world for that type of thing.
Luckily, we didn't have a war like this for a long time, and unfortunately, we didn't have the exact right approach. But there are very interesting partnerships. The former chief psychologist of the army is joining together with a former McKinsey consultant or partner and some funders to actually invent new approaches to these needs. I'm pretty sure we'll see amazing innovation come from Israel in the coming months and years. We'll see. We'll see Israel invent new approaches in the emergency and in the need. Wow. That will serve the world at a much larger level. But yeah, there's a lot of work.
That's fascinating because you're saying it's both quantitative and qualitative. It's quantitative in the sense that we're just not equipped. We don't have enough providers. And then there's qualitatively, right. We need better approaches. We need unique approaches that are uniquely tailored to the Israeli society and this, right, very, very unique.
And the challenge, exactly. That's exactly right.
Wow. Yeah. Okay. That's fascinating. And do you find that, like, are people passionate about helping in this space? Is this something that, it's not for everybody? Everybody should be all in on this. What are you finding in terms of that?
Look, I think the response, if there has been one bright light in that whole drama, it has been the response of civil society. I think everybody I know is helping. One with barbecue, one with equipment, one with raising fund, one with my wife has a cooking factory in the basement. She and her friends have been cooking and baking and sharing with soldiers and so on. Everybody in his own way. My kids have volunteered. One of my son was in the Technion, in the university. He dropped everything and joined the army for 2 months before his service to help develop systems to identify drones. The second one went out, younger one, to make packages for. Everybody is helping, and that has been the bright light. And so now we need to kind of sort of channel all this positive energy into a more structured way, leading to longer term impact that can help the society in a bigger way. But we're seeing social movements already being built on top of that incredible volunteer base to help the country long term.
It's funny. This is like a silly example of it, but I was at a wedding this past Thursday night, and I was sitting talking to President Ari Berman of Yeshiva University, and I was actually telling him that I'm teaching a course at Cy Sim School of Business this semester. And he said to me something very interesting. He said, and I said to him, really, like, I part of the impetus was like I was watching what was going on college campuses in America, and I wanted to feel I was doing something. So he said the same idea that, like, everybody on their very small level, it could be the tiniest thing, like teaching a course, or we all want to do something. We all want to feel what we're adding, particularly those of us who are further away want to feel that we're whatever impact that we can. So I think that's very well said. I want to ask you also, we hear a lot about this achdut. I actually, Jen Early, who's sadly become very well known in recent weeks and months. She was the mother of a soldier who was killed in fighting in Gaza. She's been on a number of podcasts and she's traveled to the States. Very, very articulate, powerful, inspirational woman. And I heard her say in response to a question that would she go back to before October 7th if she could, knowing what she knows now, about the loss of her son. And she said she would not because of the achdut. She doesn't want to lose the achdut in society. So I want to ask you, as somebody on the ground, just could you give me an example or two of not just, call it pie in the sky, the achdut, but where you see that there's actually been real movement on that front.
Yeah, I just want to say that she must be on a very high level to speak this way.
Of course.
I have to say, that we didn't suffer in our immediate family, but going to the the levayot and the shivot of close friends who lost their sons, there's nothing more dramatic and sad. I've never been as sad as coming back from these events. I would give a lot to go back, but she must be on a higher level, and I respect that, and I hope we see the bright light. Afterwards we realize that this was actually for the better, but we're not completely yet there. Now, to your question, achdut for me means a few things. I was talking to the very, very, very brilliant owner of one of the largest venture capital fund in Israel, a leftist person who has been fighting against the justice reform with all his strength and behind some of the largest demonstrations. And he was telling me how through in the last month, he had become friends with a few well-known rabbis because he had worked with them to develop a charter for how the country could come out stronger and establish dialogue across very different camps. And he was naming rabbis that he had become friends with and speaking about them with respect. And those were on the complete other side of the political spectrum and probably came from very different backgrounds than he did. That's an example of achdut. I think another example of achdut is the way that the US community, quite frankly, has responded. The fact that there has been such mobilization, not just of money, not just of goods, but people actually coming here on delegations, being on the ground, visiting, bereaved families, visiting hospitals, going to bases. But it has had tremendous impact on the country. That's another example of achdut. I think more generally, the fact that all of us have spent so much more time helping others in the last 4 months than we typically did. Most of us were focused on 90% on ourselves and 10% on others, or 95 on others, and that has changed radically. And everybody has been a lot more open to help everyone. So these are hopefully changes on which we can build an even better Israel.
I make a joke, they'll say in the news like Lincoln's like on his 7th trip, to the region. And I'm like, I know plenty of people in my neighborhood have been to Israel more than 7 times in the last 4 months. I know people literally are back and forth every other week. I mean, it's not it's a low human, right? It's very hard to achieve.
Absolutely.
So that's a great response. Very, very powerful. As we wind down our conversation, and this could go on for hours, it's been very, very interesting, I have to say. We can't cover everything, etc. But I want to talk a little bit about the nuance. You obviously are servicing a very well endowed professionally in terms of you're really guiding major foundations, people who have really substantial amounts of wealth to distribute and to impact. But I'm curious to hear some of your advice and some of your guidance. You kind of mentioned it, in passing about how you go about your own kind of how you went about giving your own stucca in the times when you were working in for-profit. But I would love to hear a little bit about some of your input, some of your insights. Just we call the Rebbe Yisrael, the regular person, who's in shul and Mishulach comes over to him, and we're very blessed here in the 5 towns. I can't go a day in Minyan without 7 different Mishulachim coming with their credit card machines to ask for support. I'm just curious, advice, guidance, insights. How do you, what do you tell people? Again, you said it also beautifully. A lot of the questions I wanted to ask you kind of intuitively answered already, but I'm like, how do you it's very subjective, obviously. There's no question. A lot of subjectivity.
No, but I actually have thought, that's how I got into the whole space. I had developed my own methodology for my own giving. I'm Swiss, I'm organized. I always had this spreadsheet where I knew how much I made this year, what's the money I should be giving out. And over the years, I refined the system for how to do that, which I wrote up. I'll send you the link. It was published in the Jerusalem Post in a few articles. I'll share it with you. But in a nutshell, I would say the following. First of all, okay, and everybody should find what resonates for him. But what resonated for me was to say, first of all, I'm trying to think about my tzedakah in a top-down way. Actually, not to respond ad hoc to people coming to me, even though you should always leave a few dollars for that, but to say top-down, what do I care about? Is it poverty, Torah learning, healthcare? What is it? Second, to think about the sort of legacy you want to live. What do you want to be known for? Someone who supported this, that, and really try to form a vision of what you want to be known for and how that translates into giving areas. The third one is to have a sense of what the numbers look like. You're going to be giving, hopefully, hundreds of thousands of dollars over your life. And so try to get a sense of where you want that to go and how much you can afford to give. For those of us who are blessed to have a little bit of extra, what's the maximum that you can give while still being comfortable and taking care of your family? And often the numbers are bigger than you would think.
By the way, I just make that point. It's a conversation that I had once with a major philanthropist, and I think about this sometimes. He was explaining to me that, people of extraordinary wealth, but most people who give substantially, like the pain is not the money that they're giving away, right? It rarely impacts their lifestyle or their personal life or their grandchildren or whatever it is. Like he was, the pain is like I don't mean the pain, I mean, where it hurts, quote unquote, is more in the time investment and making sure, and all that we've been talking about, right? The structure of it, right? Like, but it doesn't really hurt them in the pocket, right? Like, I don't know anybody that I'm sure there are people that give away more than they can afford to give away, and that may not be advisable, but I'm saying, like, it's just, it always dawns upon me in this space, like, nobody's really giving away money that they can't afford to give away. They may say, I can't give you right now, but like, is anybody, nobody really is doing that, right?
No, but few people are thinking strategically around how much do they really need for themselves and their families, and how much is really extra, and starting to spend this now. Many people are saying, when I'm 80, I'm going to give this money. But the Jewish people need your money now. So if you're going to have money extra when you're 80, and you know that already, might not be a bad idea to start giving it today.
By the way, I was having this conversation with somebody near and dear to me. It's a parallel discussion. It's interesting. Like there are a lot of, and it's more of a personal discussion in the sense that there are a lot of people. There's different. I'll say like this: there are different outlooks in terms of Yerusha. Right? We're learning today's Yomi even about inheritance and you steal something and then you steal from your father. The Gemara is talking about today. But this idea that like some people like they may be very wealthy, but they're going to hold on to their money until 120, and then their kids will have it. And other people start giving away the Yerusha while they're still alive, and like I feel a little bit similar. I'm curious, yeah.
Right. So I want to argue. So I have that in my own family. I see these different approaches. I want to argue that those who give early and learn a bit about the impact of their money will get a lot of emotional return from the money that they have given. They will get immense pleasure and satisfaction and emotional returns for the good that they have done when they were alive, and that there's no reason to deprive yourself from that good and leave the money to be given to later. Plus, as one donor has told me, you never know how your kids will turn out, and they might not be fully aligned with your own priorities. So once you've taken care of whatever you want to take care of for them, the extra you should be giving yourself so that you can direct it to the place that you want. Now, the family is an important component. I think actually people who have a bit older kids, I don't know, maybe from the age of bar mitzvah and above, they should be doing this giving with their families. I took my own kids before the bar mitzvah on a little trip here in Israel, and we always made sure to visit 2 or 3 nonprofits, and I asked them to pick one that they would give their maaser to, and I try to involve them now also in my choices in order to sort of train them, hand over the values, and it gives us some joint things to work on. Now, the next and last question is, okay, now, how do you know which nonprofit to give to once you've made all these assessments of how much and which field and so on? I have a number of rules. They're written up. I'll give you a brief summary. I try to work with people who are experts in the field that they work on, experts in poverty and expert in health, not just people who started just now. I try to get to the root cause of issues. You know, if you work on poverty, try to understand why are people poor, what are the underlying psychological issues, educational issues, and work on those so that you save the family from poverty for the future, not just, you know, sort out this week's
You're more of
problem.
a like a psychodynamic therapist than a behavioralist in terms of but it's true.
Yeah, I call it getting to the root cause. I mentioned before, I like to look for leverage. I look for organizations that have lots of volunteers so my money can get further. I look for organizations that measure in some way the value that they deliver for the investment. And every 2 or 3 years, I look back at the strategy and say, is that still the right strategy that works for me? And I make some changes. I'm also not afraid of dropping organizations from the list after a few years. I say I was a venture capital investment. I helped you get going. Now you're much bigger and better. You go on your journey, and I'll help the next philanthropic startup.
It's very interesting. I've been seeing more and more in my work philanthropists bringing their family into discussions or planning for the future philanthropy of the family. It's something that it's noteworthy. I think the people that are blessed to be in these impactful positions do, for the most part, take it quite seriously and want to see. It's interesting. It's like you would think like maybe it'd be the opposite. Like, like the less money you have, the more careful you would be in terms of how you give it away. But it's actually, actually not that way in the sense that, people who have a lot of it appreciate almost more, like the impact that it can make, so on. And but what is your advice, kind of like just for the, just like the regular person who, that's your advice. I mean, whatever, it's not a question of how much you're giving away. It's just a question of whatever amount you're able to give away to go about it in a thoughtful.
Exactly, to do it smart. I call it smart tzedakah. To do it thoughtfully, smartly. And again, I think you should not underestimate the emotional returns for you, the educational returns for your family of giving big early, rather than waiting for after 120 for your kids or grandkids to distribute the money and to deprive yourself of those benefits.
I hear. Very nice. No, beautiful. Do you miss on any level the for-profit space that you worked in for many years, or not? Not?
I miss the people I worked with at McKinsey, some of the most interesting, capable individuals. I miss that a little bit. I don't miss much else. No, I've given up most of the business stuff I was doing so that I could focus on philanthropy. I have a lot more time for my family. I'm more healthy. I can work out more. I can learn a lot more. No, there's nothing I really miss, frankly.
Okay, Michael, I want to thank you so much for this riveting conversation, and I appreciate you making the time. Thank you so much.
It was great to talk to you, Rob David.